For nearly 50 years, the fate of 1 billion souls was held in the manicured hands of a woman who was never supposed to rule. She entered the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine and left it as the most powerful woman in Chinese history. To some, she was a cold-blooded tyrant who strangled the modernization of her country to preserve her own power. To others, she was a brilliant pragmatist who held a crumbling empire together for half a century against the relentless tide of Western imperialism. This is the story of Cixi, the Dragon Empress. The year was 1851. A young girl from the Manchu Yehonala clan was selected during the triennial draft of girls to serve in the court of the Xianfeng Emperor. At the time, she was just one of many, a low-level consort of the 5th rank. She was not a princess, and she was not the primary wife. In the labyrinthine world of the Forbidden City, a girl in her position was often destined for a life of quiet obscurity, forgotten behind high crimson walls. But Cixi was different. She was literate, she was observant, and she understood the currency of the court: influence. In 1856, she gave birth to the emperor's only surviving son. In an instant, her status shifted from a minor consort to the mother of the future emperor. While the emperor's official wife, Empress Zhen, later known as Xian, held the higher rank, Cixi held the biological key to the throne. As the Xianfeng Emperor's health declined, exacerbated by the stress of the Second Opium War and the devastating Taiping Rebellion, Cixi began to assist him in reading state papers and handling administrative tasks. She was learning the mechanics of power while the empire around her was burning. When the emperor died in 1861 at the Summer Palace in Chengde, he left behind a 5-year-old boy and a power vacuum. He had appointed a group of 8 regents to guide the young heir, intentionally excluding Cixi and the Empress Dowager Xian. It was a move designed to keep the women of the court in their place. They were expected to mourn and stay silent. Cixi had no intention of being silenced. In what would become known as the Xinyu coup, Cixi forged an unlikely alliance with Xian and the late emperor's brother, Prince Gong. While the funeral procession for the late emperor was making its slow, ceremonial way back to Beijing, Cixi struck. She accused the regents of forging the emperor's will and acting against the interests of the state. With the military support of Prince Gong, she had the regents arrested. Some were forced to commit suicide, others were executed. In one swift, ruthless stroke, Cixi became the de facto ruler of China. But there was a problem. In the Qing Dynasty, a woman could not officially sit on the throne. To solve this, a literal curtain was placed behind the emperor's seat. Cixi and Xian would sit behind this yellow silk screen, whispering instructions to the child emperor. This became known as ruling from behind the curtain. For the next several decades, China's policy was decided not by the man on the throne, but by the woman in the shadows. The China Cixi inherited was a mess. The Taiping Rebellion, the bloodiest civil war in human history, was tearing the southern provinces apart. Western powers were demanding more trade concessions and more territory. The empire was technologically decades behind the industrializing West. Cixi's response was the self-strengthening movement. She realized that for China to survive, it had to adopt Western military technology and industrial methods while maintaining its Confucian soul. She oversaw the creation of modern shipyards, the laying of telegraph lines, and the training of a new, modernized army. However, Cixi was always a Manchu first and a reformer second. She was constantly balancing the demands of progress against the rigid traditions of the Manchu nobility who kept her in power. She was a master of the divide and rule strategy, playing various factions against each other to ensure no one became powerful enough to challenge her. Tragedy and scandal continued to follow her. In 1875, her son, the Tongji Emperor, died at the age of 18. Officially, it was smallpox, though rumors of a dissipated lifestyle in the city's brothels persisted. His death presented a constitutional crisis. Usually, the succession would move to the next generation, but Cixi, desperate to maintain her role as Empress Dowager, broke all protocols. she selected her 3-year-old nephew, Guangxu, and had him adopted as her own son. This allowed her to begin another long regency, effectively starting her rule all over again. As the Guangxu emperor grew older, a rift began to form between the aunt and the nephew. The emperor was captivated by the idea of radical reform. In 1898, he launched the 100 Days Reform, a series of sweeping decrees aimed at turning China into a constitutional monarchy, modernizing the education system, and purging the corrupt bureaucracy. To Cixi and the conservative elites, this was an existential threat. They believed these reforms would strip the Manchus of their privilege and destroy the very fabric of Chinese society. Cixi did not hesitate. She emerged from her supposed retirement at the Summer Palace, staged a coup, and placed the Guangxu emperor under house arrest. He would remain a prisoner for the rest of his life, confined to a small island within the Forbidden City complex. The reformers were executed, and the decrees were revoked. Cixi was back in total control, but her resistance to change had set China on a collision course with the modern world. This tension exploded in the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, a secret society known as the Boxers, who believed they were immune to foreign bullets, began attacking Christian missionaries and Chinese converts. They eventually marched on Beijing, intent on driving the foreign devils into the sea. Cixi faced a choice: crush the Boxers or use them. Driven by a lifetime of resentment against foreign bullying, she chose the latter. She declared war on the 8 greatest powers in the world, including the United States, Great Britain, and Japan. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The Boxers were no match for modern weaponry. The 8-nation alliance invaded Beijing, looting the city and forcing the imperial court to flee into the interior of China, disguised as peasants in a wooden cart. It was the ultimate humiliation for the Dragon Empress. When she finally returned to Beijing, Cixi was a changed woman. She began to embrace the very reforms she had once suppressed. She abolished the ancient civil service examination system, banned foot-binding, and even began moving China toward a constitutional government. She hosted tea parties for the wives of foreign diplomats, trying to soften her image as a xenophobic tyrant. But for many, it was too little, too late. The revolutionary fires were already burning. In November 1908, the drama of Cixi's life reached its strange, dark finale. On November 14th, the Guangxu emperor died suddenly at the age of 37. The very next day, Cixi herself passed away. For a century, people whispered that she had poisoned him, unwilling to let him outlive her and undo her legacy. In 2008, forensic testing of the emperor's remains revealed levels of arsenic 2,000 times higher than normal. Even in death, Cixi ensured she had the final word. Before she died, she performed one last act of political maneuvering. She appointed a 2-year-old boy named Puyi to be the next emperor. She likely hoped for another long regency, where her chosen successors could rule, but the empire was exhausted. 3 years after her death, the Qing Dynasty collapsed, ending 2,000 years of imperial rule in China. The legacy of Cixi is a battlefield of history. To the Republicans who followed her, she was the vampire of the Forbidden City, a woman whose corruption and greed led to the downfall of China. They pointed to the lavish marble boat she built at the Summer Palace, using funds intended for the Navy as proof of her decadence. But modern historians are painting a more nuanced picture. They see a woman who was a victim of her time as much as she was its master. She was a female ruler in a deeply misogynistic society, a Manchu ruler of a Han Chinese majority, and a medieval monarch in an industrial age. She held together a vast, fracturing empire against impossible odds for nearly half a century. Whether she was a villain or a survivor, one thing is certain: Cixi was a force of nature who refused to be a footnote in history. She didn't just live through the end of an era, she defined it. Subscribe for more.